The apartment always smelled faintly of old books and the lavender candle I burned when I was stressed. It was late October. It's a kind of gray Seattle afternoon that made the string lights in the living room feel necessary, even at 3 o'clock. I'd been living with Elias for 5 weeks exactly, and I still hadn't figured out how to act normal around him. I'd answered his Craigslist ad on a whim, quiet PhD student seeking same. No pets, no smoking, rent-controlled, Capitol Hill. When he opened the door for the viewing, the first thing I noticed was how tall he was, how he had to duck slightly under the low beam in the hallway, dark hair that fell into his eyes when he read, pale skin dusted with freckles across the bridge of his nose, a voice like someone who'd spent years learning to speak softly in libraries. He shook my hand, apologized for the mess there was no mess, and asked if I minded that he sometimes forgot to take the recycling out on time. I told him I was the same way about dishes. We signed the lease 2 days later, 5 weeks in. I knew he was getting his doctorate in comparative literature, that he took his coffee black and scalding, that he played piano when he thought I wasn't home, choppin'. The same for nocturnes on repeat until they lived inside my ribs. I also knew I was in the kind of trouble that didn't have a name yet. It was a Thursday when he knocked on my door, to soft taps like he was afraid of disturbing the air. I was pretending to grade papers. In reality, I was staring at the same sentence for 20 minutes. Hey, Leon. His voice through the wood was hesitant. Can I ask you something kind of weird? I opened the door. He was leaning one shoulder against the frame, wearing an old gray sweater that was too big for him and made him look younger than 31. His cheeks were pink. He wasn't meeting my eyes. Define weird, I said, trying to sound casual. My pulse betrayed me immediately. He rubbed the back of his neck. So, there's this research thing for my department. They're doing a study on posture and musculoskeletal health in academics. Apparently, grad students and professors have the worst shoulders in the world. He laughed, but it was nervous. They want baseline measurements. Neck, shoulders, upper back, the usual, but also, he gestured vaguely at his torso. Spine curvature, ribcage width, that kind of thing. You need a second person to do it properly. And I don't. I don't really have anyone I'd feel okay asking, stared at him. The request was so perfectly Elias, turning something clinical into something almost confessional that I almost laughed. You want me to measure your back? I said slowly, and shoulders. And, yeah, if that's insane, just say no. I can figure something else out. He finally looked at me then, gray-green eyes behind the glasses he only wore at home, and I realized he was embarrassed. Elias, who could quote Rilke in the original German and once told a pushy adjunct to fuck off in the most polite way I'd ever heard, was embarrassed to ask me to touch his back with a tape measure. It's not insane, I said. My voice came out rough. I can do that. Relief flooded his face so openly it hurt. Really? Thank you? Seriously? I owe you dinner? Or like a kidney? Start with dinner, I said. When do you need to do it? Saturday? I have the protocol printed out. It's very official. He smiled, small and lopsided. They even specify how much to exhale. Saturday came in with rain against the windows and the radiator clanking like it was personally offended by the cold. I spent too long choosing a shirt nothing too tight, nothing that made me look like I was trying. Elias emerged from his room in a black t-shirt and soft sweatpants, hair still damp from the shower. He held a flexible tailor's tape and a printed packet with color-coded diagrams. I made coffee, he said, and I cleaned the living room so we don't do this next to your stack of ungraded midterms. That stack is a cry for help, I said. He laughed, and the sound loosened something in my chest. We moved the coffee table aside. The protocol was comically thorough. Stand with feet together, arms relaxed at sides, exhale fully but naturally. He handed me the tape like it was fragile. Shoulders first, he said, turning his back to me. I stepped closer. The t-shirt was thin enough that I could see the faint outline of his spine, the way his shoulder blades moved when he breathed. I smelled his shampoo, something green and sharp in the warmth of his skin. "Arms out a little," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. He raised them slightly, like a cautious bird. I slid the tape across the broadest part of his shoulders, fingers brushing the soft cotton, the heat beneath it. He was warm. Always warm, like his body ran a few degrees higher than everyone else's. 46 inches, I read. "That can't be right," he muttered. "I'm not that broad." "You are," I said before I could stop myself. He went still. I pretended not to notice. Next was chest expansion. Inhale fully, exhale fully. Measure the difference. He took a slow breath, ribs lifting under the shirt. I wrapped the tape around him, just below his pectorals. My knuckles grazed the front of his shirt. Neither of us spoke. I could feel his heartbeat, quick and light. 2.5 inches. I said quietly. "Good lung capacity," he answered, like he was reading from a script. We moved down the list. Natural waist. He lifted the hem of his shirt just enough for me to slide the tape around his skin warm. Alive. A faint line of dark hair disappearing into the waistband of his sweats. My thumb brushed the dip of his spine and he shivered, almost imperceptibly. "Sorry," I whispered. "It's okay," he said. So softly I felt it more than heard it. Then came the one I'd been dreading, thoracic curve. He had to lean forward slightly, hands on his knees. I measured from C7 to T12, following the gentle arc of his spine with the tape. My fingers traced the vertebrae through the shirt, counting silently. He was perfectly still, but I could see the pulse in his neck. When I finished, I stepped back. The rain had stopped. The room felt too quiet. "That's everything," I said. He straightened slowly and turned to face me. His eyes were darker than usual, pupils blown wide. "Thank you," he said. "I know that was a lot." "It wasn't," I lied. He looked at me for a long moment. Then, "Leon." "Yeah." "I lied a little," he said. "The study is real. The measurements are real. But I could have asked anyone. I wanted." He stopped, swallowed. "I wanted it to be you." The air left my lungs all at once. "I've been trying not to be obvious," he continued, voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm not very good at it. And I thought if I asked you to do this, if I had an excuse to stand close to you, maybe I'd stop being such a coward." I took one step forward, then another, until we were close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his eyes. "You're not a coward," I said. And then I kissed him. It was soft at first, careful, like we were both afraid the moment would vanish. Then his hands came up to my face, fingers threading into my hair. And he kissed me back like he'd been waiting years instead of weeks. When we pulled apart, his forehead rested against mine. "So," he said, breathless, "the data suggests I have excellent posture when motivated." I laughed. And it turned into another kiss and another, until the measuring tape fell forgotten to the floor and the lavender candle burned lower. And the rain started again outside like it had been waiting for its cue. Later, much later, tangled on the couch, under the same gray blanket he always stole, he traced the line of my collarbone with one finger. "Next time," he murmured against my neck, "I'll let you measure whatever you want." I smiled into his hair. "Dio, but I'm keeping the protocol. For science." I never meant to memorize the exact topography of Elias's body. But some details sneak up on you when you share a 2-bedroom in Brooklyn with someone who treats silence like a second language. We'd been roommates for 7 months, long enough for me to know he brewed coffee strong enough to wake the dead at 5:45 every morning, that he folded his socks into perfect little squares, that he ran along the East River path at dawn no matter the weather, long enough for me to pretend I didn't notice how the hallway light caught the sharp line of his shoulder blades when he padded to the bathroom in nothing but running. Elias was a graphic designer who worked from home 3 days a week, which meant I came home to the low hum of lo-fi beats and the occasional muttered curse when Illustrator crashed. I was a physical therapist at a clinic in Dumbo, which meant I spent my days poking sore muscles and telling people to stop deadlifting their egos. We were friendly in the way New York roommates learned to be: courteous, lightly teasing, careful not to crowd each other's air. He left half his mail on the kitchen island. I stole his oat milk and replaced it before he noticed. We traded favors like currency. I fixed the leak under his bathroom sink. He redesigned my clinic's terrible logo for free. Balance then. One Thursday. He asked me the question that quietly detonated everything. Hey, Rowan, you have a measuring tape, right? I was elbow deep in leftover Thai curry, trying not to drip peanut sauce on the counter. Yeah, top drawer by the fridge. Why? He hesitated in the doorway, one hand rubbing the back of his neck. Elise did that when he was embarrassed, I'd learned. I'm ordering some custom shirts for this stupid client dinner thing next month. The website wants like 20 different measurements. I tried doing it myself with a string and a ruler, and I look like I'm trying to wrap a gift in a hurricane. I laughed before I could stop myself. You want me to measure you? If it's not weird, his gray eyes flicked to mine and away again. I'll buy you beer for a month? Should have been simple. Clinical, even. I measured people for a living Earths, circumferences, joint angles. I'd wrap tape around strangers' thighs and calves without blinking. But Elias wasn't a stranger. The apartment suddenly felt smaller than its 850 square feet. Sure, I said. Living room's got the best light. He nodded, grateful, and disappeared to change. I found the soft tailor's tape in the drawer, the one I used for tracking patients. Progressin tried to ignore the way my pulse had decided to run intervals. When he came back, he was wearing loose gray sweatpants and a faded black t-shirt that had once belonged to some 10K he'd run in college. His hair was still damp from a shower, curling a little at the ends. He smelled like cedar and something green I could never name. Where do you want me? He asked. There was no safe answer to that question, so I just pointed at the empty stretch of floor between the couch and the window. Stand there. Arms out like a scarecrow. He obeyed, and I started with the easy ones. Neck, shoulders, sleeve length. My fingers brushed the warm skin at the base of his throat when I measured his collar, and I felt him swallow. Neither of us mentioned it. We moved efficiently. Bicep relaxed, bicep flexed. He gave a sheepish little grin when I asked him to make a muscle, like he was 12 and showing off for the first time. Forearm, wrist, all fine. All safe. Then the form asked for chest circumference, at fullest part, under armpits. Tape snug, but not tight. Elias looked down at his shirt, then at me. Guess this has to come off. He said it casually, but there was a question underneath. I answered by giving him the same. Professional nod I gave patients before I asked them to. Disrobed to their comfort level. He pulled the t-shirt over his head in one motion and let it drop onto the couch. I'd seen him shirtless. Before grabbing something from the dryer, once when he'd fallen asleep on the couch after a long run and the AC was broken, but never this close, never with permission to look. To touch in the name of accuracy. His torso was long and lean, runner lean. The kind of build that doesn't scream gym but quietly suggests discipline. A faint tan line crossed his chest from weekend runs in the sun. There was a thin scar along his left rib cage, pale and old, shaped like a crescent moon. I wanted to ask where it came from and knew I wouldn't. Arms out again, said, pleased. My voice sounded steady. He raised them. I stepped in closer than I'd ever stood to him and looped the tape around his back. My knuckles grazed the slope of his shoulder blade. His breathing was slow, deliberate. Mine felt suddenly shallow. I brought the tape across his chest, fingers meeting in the front just below his collarbone. The numbers blurred for a second. 41, I managed. You sure? His voice was quiet, amused. You're shaking the tape a little.
Was.
God damn it. I adjusted, pulled it snug, read it again. 41 and a half. Sorry. No apologies, he said. The words brushed the top of my hair. I wrote the number down on the printout he'd brought, hyper-aware that he hadn't lowered his arms yet, that he was watching me instead of the paper, that the late afternoon light was doing something unfair to the line of his collarbone. Waist was next. I knelt purely practical, easier Anglin circled the tape just above the drawstring of his sweats. My thumb accidentally slipped under the waistband for half a second, brushing warm skin. I felt more than heard his sharp inhale. Ticklish. I asked, mostly to give myself something to say something like that. He murmured. I stood too quickly and nearly clipped his chin. He caught my elbow to steady me, fingers curling around my arm. We froze like that, me half a step inside his space, his hand on my skin, the measuring tape dangling between us like a lifeline neither of us wanted to drop. You okay? He asked, soft. I nodded. Couldn't quite look at him. We finished the rest in record time hips. Thigh inseam, he laughed when I made him stand on the coffee table so I didn't have to crouch like a goblin. When I finally stepped back and declared us done, the apartment felt 10 degrees warmer. He pulled the t-shirt back on, and the simple act of watching fabric slide over his shoulders felt indecent. Thanks. Row. He took the paper from my hand, careful not to let our fingers touch this time. Seriously. I owe you beer for a month, remember? My voice came out rough. He smiled small, private, the kind that tucked itself into the corner of his mouth and stayed there. I always pay my debts. That night I lay awake listening to the muffled soundtrack of him moving around his room drawer sliding shut. The creak of his bed frame, the soft click of his light switching off. I replayed every second of the last half hour on a loop I couldn't shut off. The warmth of his skin under the tape. The way his ribs expanded when he breathed. The scar I suddenly needed the origin story for. Friday bled into a rainy weekend. He worked from home. I picked up an extra shift at the clinic to avoid the apartment and the way it now smelled faintly of cedar everywhere I turned. We texted about groceries and whose turn it was to take out recycling. Normal things. Safe things. Sunday evening, I came home to find a 6-pack of my favorite hazy, EPA on the counter, and a post-it stuck to the top. Payment plan, installment 1. Also, client loved the mock-ups. Dinner went well. Might actually survive this job. I drank 2 of them on the fire escape, watching rain smear the lights of Manhattan into watercolor, and admitted to myself that the thing humming under my skin had a name now. I just wasn't ready to say it out loud. Monday morning, he left before I woke up. But there was fresh coffee in the pot and a new note tucked under my mug. Early client call across the bridge. Left you the good beans? Thanks again for Thursday. Still thinking about how steady your hands were. I stared at that last sentence until the letters stopped making sense. Steady. Right? That night when he came home, hair damp from drizzle and cheeks flushed from the cold. He dropped his bag, looked at me across the kitchen, and said the sentence that finally shattered the careful distance we'd been pretending was still there. So, he said, voice low when you measure someone's heart rate. Do you need them shirtless for that too? I laughed, couldn't help but tan. The sound cracked open the room. He crossed the space in 3 steps, stopped just short of touching me, and waited. I reached up, pressed 2 fingers to the side of his throat like I was checking a pulse, and answered the only way I could. Only if they ask nicely, he asked. Very, very nicely, and somewhere between the kitchen counter and the hallway, the measuring tape finally hit the floor. The apartment smelled faintly of rain and the cedar candle that Alina always forgot to blow out. It was past 11 on a Thursday, and the city outside the tall windows had gone quiet, the way only late autumn nights can. I was curled on the couch with my laptop balanced on my knees, pretending to answer emails. When Alina came in from the balcony, cheeks pink from the cold, hair escaping its braid in damp wisps. She dropped into the armchair opposite me without ceremony, kicked off her boots, and let out a long, shaky breath. Rough one. I asked. She laughed, but it cracked in the middle. I just spent 45 minutes on a client call trying to explain why they're vibrant millennial pink. Logo looks like Pepto-Bismol on every screen except theirs. And then my boss messaged me to say, the deck I stayed up until 3 revising still misses the emotional center, whatever that means. I closed the laptop. You want tea? Or something stronger? Tea's good. Chamomile, if we still have it. She rubbed her temples. God, I sound like a cliché. 28 years old, and I'm having a full existential crisis over PowerPoint. I stood, brushing past her chair on my way to the kitchen. Our shoulders touched for half a second, nothing deliberate, but I felt it the way you feel static jump from a wool sweater. 3 weeks of living together, and I still cataloged every accidental graze like evidence. When I came back with 2 steaming mugs, she'd pulled the throw blanket over her lap and was staring at the ceiling like it might offer career advice. Here, handing her the chamomile. Our fingers overlapped on the handle longer than strictly necessary. She didn't pull away. Thanks, Liv. She wrapped both hands around the mug and inhaled. Sometimes I think I'm terrible at this. Like if I were actually good at design, I'd be one of those people with a perfectly curated portfolio and a wait list of dream clients. Instead, I'm freelancing out of my roommate's spare room and crying over hex codes. You're not terrible, I said, settling on the floor in front of the coffee table so I could face her. You're just human, and clients are idiots half the time. She gave a watery smile. You always know what the worst part is. Everyone else seems to have it together. My college friends are art directors now, or they've started agencies, or they're speaking at conferences. I still don't even know if I want to stay in branding or pivot to illustration, or just burn it all down and open a plant store. I laughed softly. The algorithm keeps serving me ads for plant stores too. I think it knows we're both one bad week away from becoming succulent moms. That earned a real laugh, the kind that made her eyes crinkle at the corners. The sound loosened something in my chest. We sat in silence for a minute, the good kind, where the air feels thick with possibility instead of awkwardness. Then she said, quieter, can I ask you something kind of invasive? My pulse stuttered. Shoot, do you ever feel behind? Like there's some invisible timeline everyone else got a copy of and you're still hunting for yours. I exhaled. I could have said no. I could have told her about the promotion I'd just been offered. Or the savings account that finally had 5 figures. Or the way my mother brags about my big fancy editor job to her garden club. Instead I said, every single day. Her shoulders dropped, like someone had cut the strings holding them tense. Really? I'm 30 in 4 months, and I still don't know if I want kids, or to stay in the city, or if I even like editing half as much as I pretend to. I just got really good at looking like I have answers. Doesn't mean I do. She studied me over the rim of her mug. You always seem so calm, put together. That's the Virgo moon, I deadpanned. We're professionally serene on the outside while internally screaming. She laughed again, softer this time. Thank you. For saying that, I keep thinking I'm the only one faking it. You're definitely not. Another silence, deeper now. The radiator clanked. Somewhere down the hall, a neighbor's door shut. Elena set her tea on the side table and leaned forward, elbows on her knees. There's something else. My heart executed an Olympic-worthy somersault. Yeah, last weekend, when you asked me to help you hang that mirror in your room. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ears, suddenly shy. I kept thinking about how easy it felt. Standing on your bed with you, holding the level, arguing about whether it was crooked, and I realized I know all these little things about you. Like how you take your coffee with just a splash of oat milk and no sugar, and that you reorganize the bookshelves by color when you're stressed, and that you hum when you're concentrating. But I don't actually know you. Not the underneath parts. I swallowed. What kind of underneath parts? The ones you don't put on Instagram? The ones you maybe don't tell anyone? She met my eyes, steady now. I want to know those. If that's something you'd want to... The room felt suddenly too small and too large at once. I could feel my careful walls trembling. I took a breath that tasted like chamomile and cedar and the faint trace of her shampoo. I was scared, I said, the words scraping out raw when we were hanging that mirror. Because you were standing so close and you smelled like cold air and paint thinner and something sweet I couldn't name. And I thought, oh, this is dangerous. Wanting to lean over and kiss the paint smudge off your cheek is very dangerous when we still have 9 months left on this lease. Her lips parted, just slightly. Then quietly, I had the paint smudge, huh? Big one. Right here. I reached out without thinking and brushed my thumb across her cheekbone, just below her left eye. Her skin was warm. She didn't move. I thought about kissing it off, she whispered. But I was terrified you'd think I was insane. I laughed, shaky. We're both idiots. Yeah, she said, smiling now, wide and unguarded. We really are. She shifted forward until her knees bumped mine. The blanket slipped to the floor. So, she said, voice soft, now that we've established we're both faking adulthood and also apparently into each other, what do we do about it? I leaned in until our foreheads almost touched. I have a few ideas, but they might involve ignoring the lease entirely. Her hand found mine in the dim light, fingers threading together like they'd done it 1,000 times before. Good, she said, because I'm tired of pretending I don't want to know all your underneath parts. Starting tonight. Outside, the rain started again, soft against the windows. Inside, the cedar candle flickered. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel behind at all. I felt exactly, perfectly, where I was supposed to be. The apartment smelled like coffee and wet pavement that night. Outside, the city was drowning in late autumn rain, the kind that made the streetlights blur into gold halos. Inside, Leo stood in the kitchen doorway, arms folded, watching Julian pretend to read the nutrition label on a box of pasta like it was the most fascinating thing in the world. It had started 3 weeks ago, the stupid bet. Julian, fresh from a breakup that had left him quiet and hollow-eyed, had claimed he could gain 10 pounds of muscle before the new year if someone just kept him accountable. Leo, who ran marathons for fun and organized his spice rack alphabetically, had laughed and said, "Fine, I'll be your trainer. But I'm measuring everything. No cheating." So they'd turned it into a ritual. Sunday mornings, Y-in, photos, tape measure. Leo's hands careful around Julian's biceps, his chest, the soft give just above his hip that hadn't quite hardened yet. Julian joking to cover the way his pulse jumped every time Leo's thumb brushed his skin. Leo pretending he didn't notice how Julian's breath caught when he said good progress in that low, steady voice. They'd been roommates for 8 months, long enough to know how the other took their coffee, how they both hated the radiator's clank at 3 a.m., how they left the hallway light on when one of them came home late so the other wouldn't trip. Long enough to feel the shift when friendships started tilting into something that made the air in their small living room feel too thin. Tonight wasn't supposed to be different. Julian had come back from the gym-soaked hair plastered to his forehead, claiming he'd died a little on the rowing machine. Leo had laughed, tossed him a towel, and said, "Come on, let's do measurements. Can't let you skip just because you're dramatic." But when Julian lifted his shirt, something in the room stilled. Leo's fingers had trembled just slightly as he wrapped the tape around Julian's chest. Julian had gone quiet too, watching Leo's face instead of the numbers. When Leo's knuckles grazed the line of hair beneath Julian's navel, neither of them moved for a long second. Then Julian had whispered, "You missed a spot," teasing. But his voice cracked on the last word. That was Saturday. By Wednesday, the silence between them had teeth. They moved around each other like magnets flipped the wrong way close, but never touching. Julian cooked too much pasta? Leo rearranged the bookshelves twice. They both pretended everything was fine. Until tonight, Julian put the pasta box down and turned around. It wasn't really about the fitness assessment, was it? He said. Leo leaned against the counter, arms still crossed. But his knuckles were white. "My heart forgot how to beat for a second," Leo said. "When you asked me to measure you. When you stood there in my room in those stupid gray sweatpants and trusted me not to make it weird. That's what I mean." Julian exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for days. "I wanted to be near you," Leo continued, softer now. "I wanted a reason to touch your arm, your back, your wrist, anything, without it feeling like I was crossing a line we hadn't named yet. I wanted to know if you felt it too. This pull. This thing that's been living in my chest since the first time you fell asleep on the couch during that documentary. And I covered you with a blanket and sat there like an idiot, just listening to you breathe." Julian's eyes were wide, dark, unblinking. "I've been trying to figure out how to say it," Leo said. "How to ask if we could be more than the guys who split rent and argue about whose turn it is to buy toilet paper." And then Saturday happened. "You were so careful with me, Jules, so present." Like you already knew. And I got tired of pretending I didn't want this. Julian took one step forward. This, he echoed, voice rough. Say it plain, Leo said simply. You and me. Whatever we could be. And if you don't feel it, that's okay. We stay roommates. We stay friends. I'd rather have you in my life like that than not at all. But I'm tired of wondering. Julian laughed once, a broken sound, and rubbed a hand over his face. I'm terrified, he said. I know, Leo answered. He unfolded his arms, took a step closer. So am I. I don't know how to do this, Julian said. I don't know how to want someone I see every day. Someone I already care about this much? What if we ruin it? What if we ruin us? I don't know either, Leo said, but I want to find out. I want to try. With you. The rain hammered harder against the windows. Julian looked at him for a long moment, really looked. Like he was memorizing the shape of Leo's fear and hope all at once. Okay, Julian said finally. Okay, Leo repeated, the word trembling between them. Okay, Julian said again, stronger. Let's find out. They didn't kiss. Not yet. Leo reached out instead and took Julian's hand. His fingers were cold from nerves, but Julian's were warm, curling around his like they'd done this 1,000 times in another life. What happens now? Julian asked, voice barely above the rain. Leo smiled small, real, a little shaky. Now we talk, he said. Really talk. And maybe tomorrow night I take you out. Somewhere that isn't this apartment. Somewhere with candles and overpriced wine and a table between us so I can look at you without. Pretending I'm not completely gone for you? Julian's answering smile was slow and stunned and beautiful. Like that, he said. So they stood there in the kitchen, hands clasped. The pasta forgotten on the counter. The rain kept falling like it was applauding. Their first real date was on a Thursday. That smelled like falling leaves and possibility. Leo had chosen a tiny Spanish place tucked into the side of a brick building downtown, red walls, flickering candles in glass jars. A guitar player in the corner who only knew 4 songs but played them like they were prayers. Julian wore the charcoal sweater Leo had once said looked good on him. Back when compliments still lived safely in the land of friendship, Leo wore the navy shirt that made his eyes look like the sea after a storm. They were nervous in new ways. Julian knocked over the salt shaker, reaching for the bread. Leo laughed too loud at a joke that wasn't even that funny. They both kept touching their silverware like it might run away. But then the wine came, and the lights dimmed a little more, and Julian looked up and said, You know this is still insane, right? That we're here. That 3 weeks ago, I was standing half naked in your bedroom, pretending I wasn't imagining you kissing me. Leo's fork paused halfway to his mouth. I was imagining it too, he said quietly. Every time I measured your chest, I had to count to 5 in my head so I wouldn't lean in. Julian's foot found Leo's under the table, slow, deliberate. Neither of them moved away. They talked for hours. About everything and nothing. About Julian's ex, who never asked how his day was. About Leo's mother, who still sent care packages with handwritten notes in Italian he couldn't read. About how scared they both were of messing this up. About how much they didn't want to miss it. When the check came, Leo paid before Julian could argue. Outside, the air was cold enough to see their breath. They walked home slowly, shoulders brushing, hands in their coat pockets, because it still felt too soon to hold hands on the street like it was easy. But when they got to their building, in the dim glow of the hallway light they always left on for each other, Julian stopped. He reached out, fingers curling into the front of Leo's coat, and pulled him close. Their first kiss tasted like red wine and relief in 3 weeks of waiting. It was soft at first, tentative, almost polite, then deeper, when Leo made a quiet sound and Julian answered it with his whole body. They kissed like people who had been practicing in their heads for weeks, were finally allowed to get it right. When they pulled apart, foreheads still touching, Julian whispered, We're really doing this. Yeah, Leo breathed, smiling against his mouth. We really are. Later. In the apartment that no longer felt quite like just a shared space, but something warmer, something theirs. They left the lights low and talked until the rain stopped and the city went quiet. They fell asleep on the couch, tangled together under the same blanket Leo had once tucked around Julian months ago, when he thought no one was watching, and somewhere between the steady beat of Julian's heart under Leo's ear and the soft hush of breath against his hair, they both understood this was the real beginning, not the measurements, not the careful distance. This reaching in the dark, mouths finding each other in the quiet, the slow, brave choice to stop wondering and start becoming. This was them choosing each other. Finally. The ad was short and to the point. Furnished room in a 2-bedroom mission flat. Sunset light, quiet street, one very chill room at me. No couples, no cats, no crypto bros. $1,400 plus utilities. I was 29. Newly single after a 5-year relationship that had ended with the quiet click of a door rather than any dramatic fight. I needed somewhere to land. I replied on impulse, showed up with a suitcase and a dying pothos. Met Elias. He opened the door barefoot, wearing an old Cal sweatshirt and paint-splattered jeans. Dark hair that looked like it had been cut with kitchen scissors. Hazel eyes that didn't linger too long, but still managed to notice everything. He shook my hand like we were already friends. Leo, right? Come in. Ignore the chaos. I'm finishing a piece for a show next week. The living room was half the flat was his studio. Canvases leaned against every wall, some blank, some half-live with color. The air smelled like turpentine and coffee. He gave me the tour in under 2 minutes. Kitchen. Bathroom. My room with the bay window. The fire escape we weren't technically allowed to use. Then he handed me a key and said, "Welcome home." That was 6 weeks ago. We settled into an easy orbit. He painted late. I wrote copy for a non-profit that saved sea otters and went to bed early. Sometimes I'd wake to the soft scrape of his brush at 3 a.m. and find him on the couch the next morning, asleep under a drop cloth. We shared groceries without keeping score. He made espresso strong enough to wake the dead. I baked banana bread when I was anxious. We never ran out of milk. The first time I really noticed him noticing me was the night the radiator in my room exploded. It was February, raining sideways. I came home soaked and shivering to find water hissing out of the ancient pipe like a dragon with a grudge. I yelped. Elias appeared in the doorway holding a palette knife like a weapon. Jesus. Okay, turn the valve no. The other one here. Let me. We wrestled with it together, shoulders bumping, sleeves soaked. When the flow finally slowed to a pathetic drip, we stood there panting, dripping on the hardwood. He looked at me, hair plastered to his forehead, and started laughing. I laughed too, because the whole thing was ridiculous. "You're freezing," he said. "Come on." He led me to the bathroom, handed me the fluffiest towel I'd ever touched, and disappeared. A minute later, he was back with one of his hoodie's soft paint flecked, smelling faintly of linseed oil and cedar. I put it on. It swallowed me. "You look better in it than I do," he said. And there was something careful in his voice, like he was testing the air between us. I looked up. He was closer than I expected. The overhead light caught the gold in his eyes. "Thanks," I said. My heart was doing inconvenient things. He nodded once and left me to change. After that, the apartment felt smaller in the best way. We started finding excuses. He needed an opinion on a painting. Did the cadmium yellow feel too aggressive? I needed someone to taste the experimental carbonara I was attempting. We watched old movies on his laptop, shoulders touching on the couch. Once, he fell asleep during La Dolce Vita with his head on my thigh. And I sat perfectly still for an hour just to keep him there, but we never quite crossed the line. We were roommates. Good ones. The kind who remembered each other's coffee order and didn't steal each other's leftovers. Crossing the line felt like it might ruin the only soft place I'd landed in years. Then came the night of the jacket. Elias had a gallery opening in North Beach. He'd been vibrating with nervous energy all week, pacing, repainting the same corner of a canvas 12 times, forgetting to eat. The morning of the show, he realized the blazer he'd planned to where had a massive turpentine stain. Across the lapel, he knocked on my door, holding it like a dead animal. Leo, emergency. Do you own anything? Black that isn't a hoodie? I laughed. Define anything, he groaned. I can't show up looking like I slept in Jackson Pollock's studio. I rummaged through my closet and produced the one nice thing I owned. A tailored black wool jacket I'd bought for my ex's sister's wedding and never worn exactly once. He held it up. This might actually work. Can I try it? He slipped it on. It fit almost perfectly, same shoulders, maybe half an inch shorter in the sleeves. He turned to the mirror, smoothed the front, and looked. Devastating. The jacket made him look older, sharper, like someone who belonged in a gallery with his name on the wall. Damn, I said before I could stop myself. He met my eyes in the mirror. Yeah. He didn't take it off for a long time. The opening was loud and bright and full of people who used words like currency. I stood near the cheese table, feeling underdressed and proud anyway, watching strangers fall in love with his paintings. Elias moved through the crowd like someone who secretly hated crowds, smiling politely, answering questions, always scanning until he found me. Every time our eyes met, he relaxed a fraction. Near the end of the night, he appeared at my side holding 2 plastic cups of cheap Prosecco. Hey, you came. You thought I'd miss it. I hoped, he said quietly. We slipped outside to the alley behind the gallery. The rain had stopped. The air smelled like wet concrete and garlic from the Italian place next door. He leaned against the brick wall, jacket still on my jacket, hands in pockets. They sold 3 pieces. He said like he couldn't quite believe it. I know. I watched the little red dots appear. I'm proud of you. He looked at me for a long moment. Leo, he said, I need to ask you something, and if the answer's no, we forget I ever said it, okay? My stomach flipped. Okay, that day with the radiator, when I gave you my hoodie, when we've been sitting too close on the couch and pretending we're not, when I borrowed your jacket tonight and kept thinking how much I liked the idea of wearing something that's yours. He took a breath. I've been trying to find a way to say this without sounding like a cliché. I like you. Not roommate-like. The other kind. The kind where I want to kiss you in this alley, and then again when we get home, and every day after that, if you'll let me. The city noise faded to a hush. I stepped closer. You're wearing my jacket, I said. It seems only fair I get to kiss the person in it. He laughed once, surprised and relieved, and then he kissed me. It was cold out, but his mouth was warm. His hands came up to cup my face like I was one of his canvases, careful, deliberate, like he'd been imagining the brushstrokes for weeks. I grabbed fistfuls of the jacket. My jacket hand pulled him closer. When we broke apart, our foreheads stayed touching. I was so scared. You only saw me as the guy who leaves. Paint in the sink, he whispered. I was scared. You only saw me as the guy who stress bakes at 2 a.m. He kissed me again. Softer this time. Come home with me. We took a lift because neither of us could wait for the bus. In the back seat, we held hands like teenagers, fingers laced tight. The driver probably thought we were drunk. We weren't. We were just awake, finally. Back at the apartment, he didn't turn on the big lights. Just the string of Edison bulbs over his easels. The room glowed amber. He took off the jacket slowly, like unwrapping something precious, and hung it on the back of a chair. I should give this back, he said. Keep it, I told him. Looks better on you, he smiled, shy suddenly. Can I keep you instead? I answered by kissing him again. We didn't sleep together that night, not all the way. We stayed up until dawn on his bed, clothes half in, half off, trading stories like secrets. He told me about growing up in Fresno, the first time he realized he was gay, age 13, crushing hopelessly on his best friend who moved away senior year. I told him about my mom crying when I came out, not because I was gay, but because she was afraid the world would be unkind. We talked about fear and color theory, and the way grief of finishing a painting you love. At some point, we fell asleep tangled together, his breath warm against my neck. I woke to him tracing circles on my shoulder with one finger. Morning, he murmured. Double quotes. Hi, still real. Still real. 4 months later, the jacket lives on a hook by the door, his now, officially. My toothbrush lives in the cup next to his. There are 2 sets of paints in the bathroom, one for him. One for me. He taught me to mix colors, and I'm terrible. But he never laughs unless I laugh first. We cook together on Sundays, argue about whose turn it is to buy coffee beans, leave each other notes on the fridge and dry erase marker. Sometimes I catch him wearing the jacket while he works. Sleeves rolled up, paint on his wrists. And I think that's the moment I fell in love with him, standing in my bedroom dripping wet. Watching him realize he looked good in something that belonged to me. Last week he finished a new piece. It's me, asleep on the couch under the golden light of his bulbs, wearing his old Cal sweatshirt. He titled it Borrowed. When I asked why, he shrugged, cheeks pink. Because everything I love is borrowed, he said. The light. The color? You? I just want to give it all back better than I found it. I kissed the paint smudge on his cheek and told him he already had, and every time I see that stupid jacket hanging by the door, smile. Because it started with a stain and a radiator, and a question neither of us knew how to ask. Turns out all we needed was one honest sentence. Can I borrow this? Yes. Keep it. Keep me. Keep going. And we have.